Tēnei wā, at this time I'd like to invite Ivan Hodgetts to the podium. Also in his presentation we've got a couple of extra presentations that'll be going on through this. So, ladies and gentlemen, Ivan Hodgetts.
Kia ora, ko Ivan Hodgetts tōku ingoa. Thank you for being here. Just before I proceed with my talk, just want to acknowledge Mātua Michael Skerritt and Terry Nicholas for involving me in the Murihiku Regeneration Collective and asking me to put a bit of time and energy into thinking about the role of education and training in that kind of a program and approach. It's been a really interesting piece of work. It started in the way that a lot of the things I do with Terry starts, where Terry will ring me up and say, "Hey Ivan, what are you up to?" And then he'll give me an opportunity to be involved in something which I really appreciate. Since coming back to Murihiku in 2009, been involved with Hokanui and with Terry, and we've run a range of initiatives in and around thinking about education and training and how we support our rangatahi, how we keep them engaged with schooling, and how we grow and enable them as young people in our community. So it's great work to be involved in. I really appreciate being able to be a part of it. In this approach to Murihiku Regeneration, it really comes from those conversations over the last decade between Terry and I and with others, thinking about the role that education and training can play in people's lives. And we've kind of come up with this idea that we're thinking about it in terms of we're decentering the system. And I want to just talk a little bit today about what we mean by decentering the system and focusing on whānau-centric pathways and why we think that that's a pretty good approach to this. I think we sort of sum up our ideas in this area. We think we've got about 80% of a good idea, but we leave ourselves open to the possibility that others also have some really good ideas and that none of us has a monopoly on those ideas. I had a good example of that last week. I was out at Hokanui talking with the whānau within the alternative education program there, and we're going to be working together on how we develop up pathways and approach to supporting our young people who find themselves in alternative education programs so we can reconnect them with really good, strong and positive pathways into early adult life. So it's that kind of work that's embedded in what we're doing with this project. Just before I go into it, one of the big challenges we have as educationalists is that there's this assumption that we talk about skills for jobs and that somehow that's what education does. It just trains people, gives them some skills so they can get a job. It's a really problematic notion. It robs us as educationalists of the real purpose of what we do and what our work's about. Our work is actually about developing young humans into thriving adults. And if we don't kind of hold on to that, I think we lose sight of the things that actually really matter if we're going to support and enable people and help them develop their sense of a future. So that's reflected in how we've approached thinking about the 4 pō. When we were starting to think about the role of education and training, we had a few conversations about whether or not it was perhaps its own pō. But what we arrived at is this understanding that really it sits underneath everything we're trying to do. Because education and training is the mechanism to build the capability that runs up and through those 4 pō. Because if we don't grow capability in our people, then we can't build those pō. We won't have a strong regeneration of culture, we won't have a strong regeneration of our economy, our society and generally, or our environment. So that's why we're starting to think about this idea of decentering education and thinking about where it's located within what we're trying to do. So really, from my point of view, and I think from education's point of view, and certainly the Ministry of Education, the New Zealand curriculum describes this notion of young people will be confident, connected, actively involved, lifelong learners. And that little table there, I'm not going to go into that in any detail, but what that is the National Education and Learning Priorities. What that is a statement that comes through government to the ministry and out into the sector, and there's a form of this for the ministry that relates to schools and another form that relates to the tertiary sector. It's the things that matter in terms of what we need to focus on and think about to keep trying to make our systems better and work better in the interests of our young people and in the tertiary sense in terms of our adults. So what we tend to have is the 5 objectives and then a range of priorities that are lined up around that. And as you can see from that, it's not simply about skills for jobs. And in fact, it's all these other things about developing a human being who can think well, can engage and communicate well, can manage themselves and so on. Those are the things that allow someone to develop work-related skills, because that's kind of the easy bit, really. Teaching someone how to swing a hammer, that kind of works well, but developing them as a person who can turn up on time and think about the nature of their work and why they're doing it and all those other components. Those are the things that really matter. And we also think, and you'll see in the priorities that are currently in play for education, an emphasis on culture, on language rejuvenation and so on, because we understand those things to be incredibly important. So what we've done in terms of our approach is to focus on this idea of, well, what are the capability needs of a human being? What this does is allow us to integrate the idea of skills for particular jobs, because we can think in terms of work and life contexts and what are the capabilities a person needs. So in that way we can hear quite clearly the voice of whānau and understanding what it is that their aspirations are in a broad sense for their life. And then it's the job of people like me to understand the mechanics of the tertiary sector and so on, and how we can then think about the way that we can build that capability or what's needed. So that's where we have this idea of looking at the various forms of qualifications and approaches. A more traditional model of thinking about education and career guidance in particular is something that happens typically around about year 10 in our schools, and it's called decision guidance. So what happens is we ask our young people, what do you want to do when you grow up and when you leave school? And somehow magically at 15, you're supposed to have this well-reasoned and considered notion of exactly who you are and therefore who you want to be for the rest of your life. The way we describe that sort of technically is that identity is formed through lived experience. So if you're 15, it's problematic to assume that you've had sufficient lived experience to really have a strong sense of exactly who you are and therefore what job you want to do. So what we need to be able to do within education is to approach these things based on what we call developmental guidance. So we need an approach that holds on to the notion that a young person does have to make some decisions about their future, but how do we guide them in a way that allows them to change their mind, because they will change their mind. And it's entirely normal to rethink who you are and where you think you want to go. That's why we've taken this capability approach, because it's very amenable to that. We know in terms of career efficacy as an adult, there are those 3 components around being aware, orientated and taking deliberate action in terms of one's future. We're also fortunate within the polytech sector to have some very well-informed and sharp people that have done some good thinking around this. Otago Polytechnic has the I Am Capable tool, and also here at SIT we have a team of people who are very active in this conversation about thinking about how we orientate our system in a way that's going to support our focus on capability within our region. One of the things we know in terms of regenerative economy and looking at investment into that, one of the key questions that's going to be asked of us as a region is, do you have the capability in your people to work in the kind of industries that are being proposed? So we need to be thinking about this in a purely instrumental focus on our economy, but through a lens of developing our human beings and our people in a rich way. This kind of diagram, and you would have seen it in Terry's talk in a slightly different version. This actually started back in 2013 when Terry and I developed our student engagement service out at Hukanui. And as our way of thinking about how do we locate whānau and where they're at in the centre of our thinking and therefore what happens for them. So we keep using this as a way of thinking about our approach so that we keep putting our people in the centre of the thinking. On the right-hand side there, we've got that word capability. That's where we've located the education and training system. This is what we mean by decentering it. What we can do through this, if we make sense of what people's aspirations and interests are, then we can go to the education system and ask it to provide the kind of training and development that is needed to build the capability that fits with the aspirations of people. On the left-hand side there, that idea of autonomy and agency, that ability of people to form up and have that independent and self-determined life that we think is really important. That's the other side of this piece. So it's this kind of thinking in an active way, and it's also an approach that's intended to get us away from just focusing on outputs or objectives and trying to predict all of the future. It allows us to kind of work in a state of motion, because we know societies are always in a state of motion. I think from Michael's talk earlier today, you get that sense of if you look at the history of any society, we're in this process of change and things are moving, but you don't necessarily notice it when you're a part of that change and process of shifting. So our idea with this sort of approach is to be able to keep in pace with where our people are at. And as our economy and our community shifts, our approach to training and development and capability and everything else can follow those shifts. This is our broad model in terms of our approach. It goes from year 7 through to 13 in terms of thinking about what we know about effective practice and career education, starting with this idea of awareness. One of the things we know is really important for young people is that we have opportunities to build their awareness of the world of work and adult life. And from that, then form an orientation. Because for a lot of our young people, they imagine themselves in the kind of things that they see their whānau doing. They don't necessarily imagine themselves doing other things, because those are the norms and the expectations that surround them. So one of the important components of a good education system is that we encourage people to imagine themselves in all sorts of different opportunities. We also know that there are roughly 4 cohorts of young people that leave our schooling system. There's a term, NEET there, not in education, employment and training. That term's starting to lose its utilisation within education, and we're starting to use a term called YAL, Youth at Risk of Limited Employment. I think that YAL is actually a better acronym to use, because what it does is it tells us about the risk. What the term NEET tells us is that some people come out of our system and just find themselves struggling to figure out that transition and pathway into adult life and lacking a bit of connection to things. Whereas with that, you focus on a notion like youth at risk of limited employment, we're looking at the implications of how that pathway is playing out for those young people and what we can do to connect them back into other pathways that are going to link them to apprenticeships and other forms of training and development degrees and so on. We want to eliminate that YAL NEET type situation from our community. We want to do what we can to pull those young people into the other 3 groups, which are young people. There's nothing wrong, I think, with leaving school and going directly into paid employment if that fits with your aspirations and your capabilities and what matters for you and how you see the start of your adult life. And equally going into tertiary study and through to universities and polytechs and so on. About 70 to 75% of young people go into tertiary study from school, and about 30%, 25 to 30% don't. Of that 30% that don't, it's really hard to track their pathways and where they go. So we know a lot about the 75%, we don't know as much about the pathways for that other 30, and they're harder to connect. So that's why we've developed those 3 points there, and particularly 1 and 2 around that rangatahi pathways piece. That's about focusing on developing pathway planning and engaging those young people and building a direction for them. So we'll work very actively with our schools around that. My role at the Ministry of Education is a Principal Advisor Secondary Transitions, and that's specifically why we exist in the system, is to support that whole process of getting that connection and through to the tertiary sector, getting that right. And we're going to take that kind of thinking and that philosophy and apply it to adults as well, and do some work around pathway planning. We're working closely with the ETU union around the TY smelter process, and thinking about the support for the workers there and how we can support and enable them to make various kinds of changes. There will be some people in that smelter, depending on what happens in that context. If you're a maintenance fitter or an electrician there, then that's a relatively straightforward transition to other kinds of employment. But there will be people there that may be thinking about significant transitions, and we will need to come up with ways to support and enable them. We're also conscious that a lot of those people will have mortgages, they'll have children, they'll have a life to pay for. So it's not like they can just stop work and spend 2 years at the Polytech. So in our planning and our approach to education and training, we need to be able to think about how do we wrap around that person a form of education and training that's going to work for the realities of the life that they live. So that's why we use this idea of these threads. If we're thinking about a pathway for someone, then I think about it in terms of two threads. One of them is this kind of green thread, which is about the supports, the education and training, the kind of things that we can do to enable someone. The other thread is the job of people like myself to understand and to try and keep away from the way that we support and enable people, and that is all the bureaucracy, the rules and the regulations and the system itself and how it operates. So we need this kind of specialist expertise to understand how the system can work in the interests of young people and adults. Often in my role, I get phone calls or emails about young people who are falling out of the school system, or they're about to be excluded, or other things are happening that mean they're just struggling to sustain their engagement with school. And there are some really useful parts of the Education Act that allow us to build pathways for them. And in particular, I won't get into too much of the technicalities of it, but sections 43 and 53 of the Education Act basically allow us to build a pathway for a young person. Because section 43 means that a young person can have multiple enrolments, so you can still be at high school and you can be at the Polytech. Section 53 allows for work experience and other activities outside of the school gate. So often what I'm doing with young people who are really struggling to kind of figure out NCA and stay in school is we build a pathway for them where they'll spend some time in a workplace. They might be doing a Trades Academy program at SIT on a Friday, and they'll be doing some things in school to finish their literacy and numeracy and other components of their NCEA. That allows us to hold on to that young person and help them move in a direction that makes sense to them. And as I said earlier, it also is a part of allowing them to develop their sense of understanding of who they are and where they want to go. The TEC, Tertiary Education Commission, funds the Gateway programs, which is a formal program of learning that includes being in a workplace. One of the best outcomes of those kind of activities is a young person spends a year in a workplace, gets some credits towards their NCA, comes back to school and says, well, I don't want to be a builder. I don't like being on the tools. But I saw that guy wandering around with all the plans. Turns out he was an architectural draftsman. I'm quite interested in that. I think I'm going to head in that direction. That kind of thing is the sort of outcome that we want to see for our young people. Now we're doing all this work within Murihiku Regen within a context of significant change within the education system. There's the Rove Review that some of you may be familiar with. That's the Tipukenga now, which is the national, in a sense, national Polytech system. There's also the development of regional skills leadership groups, workforce development councils and so on. Those structures are intended to, how I would summarise that is that they provide a kind of focus on the demand orientation. It's how do we get the voice of industry and community and employers informing what we need in terms of our education and training in our system. There's also a change process occurring within the NCEA, the Senior Secondary Qualifications, and a refresh of the national curriculum. So quite a bit going on that we need to be conscious of in order to do what we're doing within the Murihiku Regen project. Talked a little bit about the abstract sort of ideas and the thinking around our approach. Just want to stop here and actually take an opportunity to kind of capture what we're doing concretely for our young people in our community. We've been working with Hannah O'Regan and Steph Blair, who runs the Rangatahi Tumeke program, which is a youth leadership program out of Awaroa, Wānanga. And what we want to do now is we want to award our first round of scholarships to young people. What this is about is actually making what we're doing really concrete. We're identifying young people in our community who are showing leadership skills, and we want to start growing them because we know we need to grow a whole new generation of leaders and young people, and so that's what we want to do today, is to just start with the first 5 recipients of those scholarships. So I'd just like to invite Dean Whanga, Steph Blair and Tātepini if he's here to come up, and we're going to award those scholarships.
Ka pai, ladies and gentlemen, the first recipients of these scholarships from Murihiku Regeneration. Can I please invite Destiny Ngaitahu, Ngairuahine, currently training in Kohangareo and Murihiku. She's very skilled with kapahaka and has been a great role model in school and on Rangatahi Tumeke over the years. 19 years of age, ladies and gentlemen, our first recipient, Destiny Nauna. Our second recipient, ladies and gentlemen, no Ngāti Porou, Jacob Tare, currently in his first year in an environmental degree at SIT, came through Rangatahi Tumeke for 12 years of age, became deputy head boy, is coming back to camps to help lead other rangatahi in the space. He's 21 years of age, ladies and gentlemen, Jacob Tare. Our next recipient, Angelia Skerritt, no Ngaitahu, started camps at the age of 12, came through the program, very skilled in kapahaka and waiata, has a beautiful baby girl. She is wanting to give back to the program and to help influence those coming through as well. She's 20 years of age, ladies and gentlemen, Angelia Skerritt. Sorry, she's 22. 22, 00. Okay, ka whai. Our next recipient, no Ngāpui, Ngāti Whātua, Nola Cassidy. Teacher at James Hargis, second year, came through the Rangatahi Tumeke program from year 10, became head girl, is coming back to help others, also 22 years of age. Ladies and gentlemen, Nola Cassidy. Is that right? Not here today. Is Maya here? Cool. Not here today, but will be hopefully later on this afternoon. No Ngaitahu Ngāpui, Maya Kairo, is currently a year 12 at Verdon College. She's been with Rangatahi Tumeke for a long time now, since 10 years of age. Looking at head girl next year at Verdon and a future in Māori law and politics. She's 17 years of age. She sends her apologies. She's doing an exam currently, much more important than being here. Ladies and gentlemen, if you could just give her a round of applause, Maya Kairo. To our rangatahi, congratulations, e mihi tēnei kia koutou. The future is bright and it's in your hands, according to our minister. She's going to pay for everything. But if you can please regather just over this side, they would like to get a photo with you for prosperity. And just like Matua Michael has said earlier, Michael Stevens, this is for historical reasons, yeah? So that we can talk about you in 50 years' time. Ka pai. So, just over this side. I'm very wary of the time. Unusual for hui such as this. We're 45 minutes ahead of ourselves. So, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to invite, once the photos are taken, is everyone good? I'd like to invite Michael Stevens, Terry Nicholas, Ivan Hodgetts, after this next speaker, of course, once this is ready. Jana, you ready? Where is he? You ready? And Ricky Parata, ka pai? Oh, and are you inviting your father up too? Yep. Okay. And rewi. Oh, yeah. Just make your way to the podium. Ivan's got one last thing to say.
I just want to invite the Regional Director from the Ministry of Education up just to speak briefly on the connection of what we're doing within Murihiku Region to the wider program of work within the Ministry. You'll notice on the left-hand side there of the slide, there are 3 foci there. Those are the areas we see ourselves needing to work in within Murihiku region. On the education system advocacy is around the structures that surround our context and how we make that work in the interests of our people. The second one about connecting our program of delivery. We do not want to be the provider of education and training. We want to make sure the partnerships with the providers of education and training are really strong and robust. The third one is something that we will take a very active role in. I'm still a professional member of the Career Development Association of New Zealand, so it's a real passion of mine and it matters to me a lot. And I think that that's the piece where we can really do some good work for our people, is by developing those pathway planning tools and resources. So I'll just hand over to Julie now.
Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Ki ngā mana whenua o tēnei takiwā, tēnā koutou. Ko tā tipuni Regan, ko Minister Woods, tēnā kōrua. He mihi mahana ki e koutou. Ko Julie Anderson tōku ingoa, hei ko kai houtu a hau ki te tahuhu o te mātauranga, Murihiku ki te taitonga. Nō reira, tēnā koutou katoa. I'm Julie Anderson, I'm the Director of Education for the Ministry of Education, and I'm really pleased and excited to be aligned and engaged and coordinating together in a collaborative way with the Murihiku Regeneration project. I'm Ivan's boss, and I'm very excited that I am, and he has worked alongside the Ministry of Education and the Murihiku Regen project, so that there's a real alignment in the work that we do, and we see the vision for education very much aligns with the vision for the Murihiku Regen. We've got a vision, a 30-year vision that's just been developed really over lots of from the kōrero over the last few years, which says, whakamauia te pai tata kia tina. Take hold of your potential so it becomes your reality. Whaia te pai ta whiti kia tata. Explore beyond the distant horizon and draw it near. And certainly Michael talked about futures were made to happen within horizons of possibility. And I thought there's a real synergy there because the possibility is about the youth and the young people and the rangatahi that we've just celebrated. And it was wonderful to see you here, and congratulations for the work that you do. And I know the leadership that you will show moving forward for everybody. And it also talks about distant horizons and the work going on in this work around the green energy, the food and fibre, the climate and concerns are absolutely pertinent to the work that we want to encourage young people to think about in education. So we've got a diagram up there which is really sort of hot off the press, but just want to highlight a couple of things because this project talked about decentralising and repositioning whānau at the centre of thinking in terms of education. And that's a high demand, a very honourable one for education, something that we really want to strive towards. So you'll notice on the waka horuia here that normally we don't have principals and people like myself driving this waka forward. Educationalists, the community, iwi hapu, employers, government agencies are sitting there in the base of this waka, but the drivers of this waka are learners and whānau, and that's the real decentering, the real shift that we want to try and work alongside with projects like Murihiku Regen in order to ensure that the voice of whānau and the thinking of the young people is what drives the way things should be in education. We've also mentioned up there the NELPs that Ivan talked about, and really important those things. We've never before talked about racism as a word in education, and one of the key NELPs that sit under the learners at the centre is safe, inclusive environments that are free from racism. Alongside that sits high aspirations in partnership with whānau and community, and this is exciting today to have the whānau and community here, and I certainly encourage you in each of your own areas to think about how the work that you do aligns with the work of the Murihiku Regen, because I know they're really excited to have this as a whole community response to the potential that they want to foster within the Southland community. So we're really pleased to see that connect. There's lots of things going on in education, changing our curriculum, New Zealand curriculum and the NCEA, But again, our curriculum's got 3 things that focus on in the moving forward. We want a curriculum that's inclusive, want a curriculum that's bicultural, and we want a curriculum that's clear and easy to understand for our teachers and everyone else. But that whole bicultural focus is really evident in the way that we want to move forward within the Ministry of Education. We know that's a challenge, and we know we can only do it when we work alongside our iwi and the wider community in order to make those changes. So there's lots going on, and I know that's probably enough, but I'm really excited that we are connected. Ivan has been doing some work for us alongside work for the Murihiku Regeneration, and we'll be doing more work in that space. And the links that sit there are between ourselves and the ministry and this work, and I know between a lot of you people and the work that you're doing are going to be really important to support the project moving forward. So we are really pleased to be involved, and we see real synergy between the work in education and the work of the project. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Thank you.